The red "Live" icon blinked in the corner of the screen as the nation tuned in to what was supposed to be a civil conversation on religious freedom in modern America. But less than 5 minutes into the broadcast, it was clear. This episode of State of the Union Voices would be anything but polite. Moderator Janine Holloway cleared her throat nervously. Let's talk about faith and the First Amendment. But J.D. Vance had already turned toward Jasmine Crockett, his tone sharp. Congresswoman, with all due respect, you speak of freedom as if it's a one-size-fits-all concept. But when faith is under attack, where is your voice then? Jasmine didn't blink. Senator Vance, I don't pick and choose which freedoms matter. I defend them all. But I won't sit quietly while religion is used as a shield to discriminate. The tension in the studio was instant and electric. J.D. leaned forward. No one's discriminating. People of faith, Christians in particular, are being silenced in the name of political correctness. School teachers can't pray. Students can't wear crosses without controversy. Is that freedom to you? Jasmine's eyes narrowed slightly. Freedom doesn't mean dominance. It means equality. If one child is allowed to wear a cross, another must be allowed to wear a hijab or a yarmulke. What you call persecution, Senator, is really just equity knocking at the door. J.D. chuckled under his breath, but there was no humor in it. Equity? That word is a Trojan horse. It disguises control as compassion. And you disguise control as tradition, Jasmine shot back. The founders didn't want a theocracy, they wanted liberty. For everyone. The studio audience stirred. Some nodded, others murmured. The divide in the room mirrored the divide across the nation. Janine raised her hand, desperate to regain control. Let's bring this back to the recent legislation in Ohio. Senator Vance, you supported the bill that allows public schools to display the 10 Commandments. Jasmine, you opposed it. Why? Vance answered quickly. Because children need moral grounding. We're raising a generation that's lost its compass. The 10 Commandments are not just religious, they're foundational values. Jasmine responded just as fast. Foundational to some, not all. What about Buddhist students? Muslim students? Or kids who don't belong to any faith? Are their beliefs less worthy of respect in your America? J.D. Vance's smile was tight. I'm not saying they aren't welcome. But this country was founded on Christian principles. That's just historical fact. And history also includes slavery, segregation, and banning women from voting, Jasmine replied evenly. Not everything from our past deserves to be preserved. The moderator winced, sensing the growing storm. But Jasmine wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her voice steady but impassioned. You say you're defending religion. What you're really doing is defending a monopoly on what morality should look like. That's not freedom. That's fear dressed up in scripture. JD's expression hardened. So now believing in the Bible is something to be ashamed of? Not at all, Jasmine said. But using it to write laws that limit someone else's life? That's where we part ways. The red "Live" light kept blinking, and the ratings were spiking. Viewers across the country leaned in closer to their screens, not for the spectacle, but for the reckoning. Two politicians. Two deeply held worldviews. One national conversation that was no longer about politics, but about the soul of America. And the show had just begun. The moderator's attempt to pivot the conversation landed like a missed free throw. Senator Vance, Congresswoman Crockett, she tried again. Surely we can all agree that freedom of religion must coexist with freedom from religion? J.D. Vance leaned back, adjusting his cufflink with slow confidence. That's a pretty way of saying, keep your faith out of sight. We've gone from tolerance to erasure. If someone bows their head before lunch, suddenly it's a problem. How is that America? Jasmine Crockett didn't wait her turn. You're not being erased, Senator. You're just being asked to share the space. Public schools, government offices, taxpayer-funded spaces. They belong to all of us. Not just the loudest faith. The camera zoomed in. Neither one flinched. J.D. leaned forward, his voice low and calculated. Congresswoman, when people of faith see drag shows in libraries and pride flags on courthouse steps, while being told they can't say Merry Christmas, it doesn't feel like sharing. It feels like surrender. Jasmine's brow raised. No one's banning Christmas, Senator. And if a drag queen reading a book to kids threatens your belief system, then your faith isn't very sturdy to begin with. A few audience members clapped. Others shifted, uncomfortable. The moderator tried to step in again. Let's return to the Bill of Rights. But J.D. wasn't finished. We're redefining the Constitution based on feelings. We used to defend truth. Now we apologize for it. Jasmine turned directly to him. Whose truth? Yours? The truth that says LGBTQ plus kids should hide who they are to make adults feel comfortable? Or the one that says a cross belongs on every wall, but a crescent moon doesn't? Vance's face twitched. Whether from frustration or restraint, it wasn't clear. America is built on compromise, Jasmine continued. But compromise doesn't mean surrendering your neighbor's dignity so your version of faith feels more at home. There was a pause. One of those rare, heavy pauses that stretches through studio lights and across living rooms nationwide. Then J.D. Vance did something unexpected. He softened. "I'm not against anyone living their truth," he said, his tone shifting. "I just don't want mine criminalized in the process. I grew up in a church where prayer was healing, where God meant order in a chaotic world. I don't want to lose that." Jasmine nodded once, respectfully but firmly. "I grew up in a church too, Senator. My grandmother's gospel voice still rings in my ears. But she also taught me this. If your faith doesn't teach you to love people who are different from you, then it's not from God, it's from fear." That landed hard. The audience was silent again, not because there was nothing to say, but because what had been said couldn't be unheard. The moderator, sensing a shift, leaned forward. "So what does true freedom of religion look like to each of you?" JD answered first. "It means I can say what I believe without being labeled a bigot. It means my kids can pray in school without a lawsuit. It means we don't erase history to make room for the new." Then Jasmine. "It means you can believe what you want, but you can't legislate that belief into someone else's body, or classroom, or job. Freedom of religion is a two-way street. We protect it by refusing to let it dominate." The two stared at each other across the table. For the first time, not as enemies, but as representatives of something larger than themselves. Not agreement, not peace, but recognition. The studio lights dimmed slightly as the show neared its final block. America had witnessed more than a debate. They had witnessed two versions of patriotism, two memories of church pews, two stories written in very different ink, bound in the same Constitution. And one final question still waited to be asked. The final segment was ticking down. Studio producers watched the countdown clocks, trying to decide whether to cut to commercial or ride the wave. But this was no longer just a program. It was a cultural moment. The moderator leaned into her mic. "I want to thank you both for what's been an intense, and at times uncomfortable conversation. Before we wrap, I'd like to ask one final question." She turned to both guests. "What would you say to an American watching this at home, someone who feels caught between honoring their faith and respecting others' freedoms?" J.D. Vance didn't hesitate. "I'd say, don't be ashamed of your faith. This country was built by people who believed deeply in something greater than themselves. My values don't come from a poll, they come from prayer, tradition, and sacrifice. I want my children to know right from wrong, and I won't apologize for that." He looked into the camera. "But I also know that yelling louder doesn't make you more righteous. The loudest voice isn't always the one guided by truth. We've all got work to do." Jasmine Crockett nodded slightly, acknowledging the shift in tone. Then she spoke, clear, confident, and deliberate. "I'd say to that person, no one is asking you to let go of your faith. But we are asking you to recognize that your faith isn't the only one in the room. That's what America is. A room where everyone gets a seat, not just the ones who pray like you, love like you, or vote like you." She took a breath. "You can keep your beliefs and still make room for someone else's dignity. That's not weakness. That's patriotism." A murmur ran through the audience. Not applause. Not outrage. Just quiet understanding. The moderator smiled, her tone softening. "Well said. Both of you." Then came the unexpected. J.D. Vance extended his hand across the table. For a split second, no one breathed. Jasmine looked at the gesture. Her eyes narrowed, not in defiance but in calculation. Then slowly, she extended her hand in return. They shook. It wasn't performative. It wasn't even comfortable. But it was real. Two Americans. Two truths. One shared respect, however fragile. Backstage, the crew scrambled. Social media was already on fire. Clips from the show were spreading across platforms. Hashtags like #Crockett vs. Vance and #Faith and Freedom trended within minutes. Commentators from both sides of the aisle began weighing in. Pundits praised the civility, the passion, the raw humanity of what had unfolded. And while the country didn't suddenly unite, it had, at least briefly, paused. In diners in Georgia, church pews in Indiana, coffee shops in California, and living rooms in Michigan people watched. Not because they agreed, but because they recognized something familiar in both speakers. J.D. Vance reminded them of tradition, the steady hand of the past. The church bells. The Sunday dinners. The sacredness of order. Jasmine Crockett reminded them of progress, the fire of the future. The marchers. The fighters. The idea that justice means expanding the table, not flipping it. After the show, Jasmine walked out of the studio to a brisk wind and a waiting car. She paused before stepping in, looking up at the gray sky, hearing her grandmother's voice in her memory. God is big enough to love them all, baby. Even the ones you disagree with. Across the lot, J.D. Vance stood near his own vehicle. He wasn't on his phone. He just stood quietly watching the horizon. Their eyes met briefly. No words. Just a nod. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was recognition. Later that evening, a Vietnam veteran in Texas posted on Facebook. I don't agree with either of them all the way. But I'll tell you this, tonight they both showed up. And that matters more than ever. A retired pastor in Ohio wrote, "What J.D. said about prayer, I felt that. What Jasmine said about dignity, I needed that." And a young teacher in Arizona tweeted, "This is what democracy looks like. Not agreement, not perfection, but presence." The show became the most watched episode of the network's season. But more importantly, it sparked conversations far beyond the studio. Conversations not about winning, but about listening. About how faith and freedom don't have to be at war. About how, in a country of 330 million people, unity doesn't mean sameness. It means commitment to the process, to the people, to the promise. As the credits rolled, the final frame lingered, Crockett and Vance facing each other, hands clasped, not in harmony but in humanity. Because in America, disagreement isn't the end. It's the beginning.